actual memorabilia for you to play with hands-on, just because it's fun and it helps to tell the story of the Big Apple. That's up here, so I'm not sure how or when to do this. Yeah, after we may not have time, but what I was thinking is after dinner at Callahan at around 7, I can be up at the front and sit down and bring this stuff and share it with you all if you enjoy looking at it. Okay.
Well, there's also the talent show here.
Yeah, talent show's at 8. You think it'd be better to do it over here?
People are going to be here.
I'm thinking about me and eating. Maybe we could do both, but anyhow, just to say that this is here, I guess we'll be starting pretty soon. I will be talking in a general way about the Big Apple and then showing you a selection from a documentary that I made on the Big Apple. Has anybody seen the documentary that I made? Okay. Don't give away the ending.
The button that did it.
Frankie and I did it. Okay, so it would be number 2 to go into the chapters.
Yeah, but did you want to?
I just wanted to start talking with this in the
Yeah,
background.
sure.
Okay. Can you all hear me when I talk just like this?
Yeah.
Okay, why don't I start here and then I'll move back. Big Apple. Thank you. I bet you hear me better now. The Big Apple was a very popular dance craze for one hot year, 1937. It absolutely swept the nation and even became known and popular abroad. Just for an example of that, but when I told this story in Italy, I got big boos from the audience, but just to say that Mussolini visited the Savoy Ballroom when he was in New York. And when he was interviewed by reporters, he said he came there because he wanted to learn the Big Apple. Okay? So it was massively popular, and I don't know if you can see that, but I just wanted to show how because the Big Apple was popular, people, the private industry kind of jumped on it and exploited it. It was an image of unity, of togetherness, of fun. We were coming out of the Depression. It was bad times. We were coming out of the Depression and heading straight for World War II. It was really a very tense period historically. And the whole nation went crazy with this very silly dance. It was like a child's game that people of all ages did. So what I brought here was some of the memorabilia. I don't know if you can see this. You might want to see it. Big Apple dresses were all the rage. Actually, the last time I gave a little talk about the Big Apple, one of our vintage clothing collectors brought some of her Big Apple items. It was really nice to have. Big Apple was done to any swing music, any popular music, but once it became popular, everybody put out a Big Apple of their own. Okay, so this is Benny Goodman's Big Apple. And I have another one here, somebody else's music. And, oh yes, A&P had their weekly apple and other food sales. They said they couldn't resist putting the Big Apple on the cover. So the dance, the Big Apple, that many of you have learned today and seen today is a rather sophisticated choreography. It's kind of hard. I don't know, how many of you do the Big Apple? Okay, I mean some of you do, but it's hard, and it was actually a piece choreographed by Frankie Manning for professional dancers, for Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. Okay, this is not what people were doing coast to coast. Okay, what they were doing was something like a square dance. It was a called dance. It was done in a circle, And there were a series of one step after another, and the steps were steps that were already familiar to people. People might have known the Susie Q. There was a Susie Q craze a few years before. There was a Charleston kicks and stuff like that. The steps themselves were already known to people. And the thing about having a caller is that it's a very regional, neighborhoody kind of thing. The caller can call steps that mean something locally. And, you know, if it's someplace where they're threshing corn or whatever, they, you know, make up steps that are relevant to the local population. The caller also knows the crowd and will invite a couple or an individual into the center of the circle to do a shine. Okay, call them in by name. What I think about the caller is that they were sort of like a combination between a rap artist and a choreographer. Okay, they called with a kind of a good rap to the music. Naturally, they had to have a good feeling for the music. And they also called the steps in a way that, I don't know, sometimes it was probably really terrific. And sometimes maybe it didn't work out at all. I don't know. Okay? It was a game. It was a popular dance. It was fun. People relaxed when they did it, and their spirits were lifted during rough times. So that's the background of the Big Apple. Arthur Murray actually got his big commercial start by jumping on the Big Apple and teaching it at his studios all around the country. And I once had the figure in my head, I no longer do, of how the number of his studios increased exponentially when he started teaching the Big Apple. So this is something that was very common in the old days, dance instruction books. And let's swing it. Let's swing it. So this is a piece that he did on the Big Apple, and it happens also to be a piece that appeared in a Life magazine, which I have here, the same pictures and stuff like that. So he really kind of jumped on it commercially and made his career on it. So the next picture, I don't know if you can see these very well, but oh, it's up to me. Huh? That's better, huh? Tell me, what do I do to get the next picture? Okay. The Savoy Ballroom. Now, one of the things about the Big Apple is that it was the kind of dance everyone can do. Everybody can do the Big Apple, okay? This is really a contradiction, because if you went to the Savoy Ballroom, you saw Whitey's Lindy Hoppers doing Frankie's Big Apple, and, you know, nobody could do it. But that was the hype that went with the Big Apple. So, we'll do some history now and see a little bit more of Big Apple, but I just wanted you to see again that wonderful image of something just very warm and friendly about the idea of an apple and people all having togetherness. Okay, so we're going to show, this is part of a larger video, a larger documentary. Down. Oh, it's in this. I'm sorry. It's within this, and then you start at number 6. You start here, and then go through one. The Big Apple is simply the biggest and most beautiful apple on the apple tree, but it's always high and slightly out of reach. It's not completely unattainable, but it is a real prize when someone gets it. In our society, apples stand for all that is wholesome and desirable. An apple a day, as American as apple pie. Well, there is that story about Adam and Eve. It was African-American musicians who first referred to Harlem as the Big Apple, long before the city of New York. Harlem was the place they all aspired to work, the place where they could make their music and make their rent too. The use of the name Big Apple for Harlem spread to African Americans throughout the rural South, where so many were migrating north. Harlem, the Big Apple, held the promise of a better life. Okay, and I just want to go straight through. Oh, where's the and sorry for the delay. This is going to be the very exciting story of how the Big Apple got its start.
Does anyone know how to use Media Plan?
This might be
Yeah, the little
right.
arrow next to DVD. And you want Owen's root menu or title menu.
Okay, good.
And then we want
7. Actually, the Big Apple dance got its name from the African American nightclub in Columbia, South Carolina, where the dance craze got its start. The local patrons, too, had dreams of a better life. Perhaps the name was music to their ears. The Big Apple building had originally been an Orthodox Jewish synagogue, the House of Peace. Women prayed separately in the balcony, while the men worshiped on the main floor below. When the congregation moved, the building started its new life.
One night, 3 white high school students heard singing music coming from the building. Dying to see the dancing inside, Billy Spivey and his 2 friends walked right up to the door. The proprietor, Fat Sam, wouldn't let them come in. He shook his head no and said, "You know I can't do that."
Segregation was not just the custom, it was the law.
Fat Sam rubbed his chin. He looked over his shoulder into the dance hall, and his eyes lit on the balcony above. "Well," he said, "as long as you stay up on the balcony and no dancing."
Soon, teenagers came night after night to watch the dancers from the balcony of the Big Apple Club. The photographers throwing down coins when the Nickelodeon stopped playing. Afterwards, they practiced the dance they named the Big Apple. By the end of the school year, Columbia's high school and college students were dancing the Big Apple at their senior proms. After school was out, many of the students went to Myrtle Beach, a popular summer beach resort near Columbia. At the Myrtle Beach Pavilion, the Big Apple became the rage, danced day and night by barefoot youngsters. With the influx of visitors to Myrtle Beach, the new dance spread quickly throughout the South in July of 1937. In no time at all, it hit the news media in the North and spread across the country. In addition to word of mouth and news coverage, the dance was spread by traveling Big Apple performance troupes, each claiming to be more authentic than the other. They were both white companies and African American companies. The publicity for the shows reflected the racial stereotypes of the times.
You ain't seen nothing till you see these colored folks do the Big Apple like they do it down in Darktown.
The black touring companies had significant obstacles to traveling because of restrictions on where they could eat or sleep and their poverty. To get to one performance, 5 of the original Big Apple nightclub dancers had to travel in a piece of farm equipment. On the way, 2 of the men lost their lives in a collision. In contrast, the white Big Apples had a charmed experience. A scout from the Roxy Theater in New York City came down to Columbia to hold a Big Apple contest. The lucky winners were invited to a 3-week engagement at the Roxy. They were the toast of the town. Some of the Roxy dancers, like Gene Foreman, stayed on to become show business professionals. Some of them returned south and toured in a show produced by Dan Fish, a retired white minstrel entertainer. who had a long career singing and dancing in blackface. This is what Dan said about the Big Apple.
Why, what they do in the Big Apple, I've been doing all my life.
In other words, he saw the Big Apple dance as a white person's amusing caricature of African American dance. By the 1930s, minstrelsy had been supplanted by vaudeville and film as popular entertainment. But it lived on through handbooks giving amateurs the tools they needed to put on their own home minstrel shows. Perhaps, for some white people, the attraction of doing a dance copied from an African-American nightclub may have been similar to the appeal of doing amateur blackface performances. As in any mass performance, the dancers have license to act in ways they would not ordinarily. They may experience a new sense of abandon and even exultation that is otherwise absent from their lives. This feeling of freedom may have contributed to the popularity of the Big Apple. But the great mystery remains. What inspired the young African-American dancers at the Big Apple nightclub to make up this dance? Many scholars agree that the ring shout is the probable root of the Big Apple. The ring shout was a religious dance that arose when the slaves came to the New World. They had been sold to their new owners without regard for their tribal backgrounds, the languages they spoke, or even their family connections. Thrown together with strangers in slaves' quarters on plantations, they developed a mode of dance worship with time-worn features that were common to all their various African backgrounds. The ring shout was not dependent on a common language or even identical religious beliefs. It was a practice of deeply felt rhythm and movement. The ring shout lifted the slaves' spirits. It helped them cope with the terrible dislocations they had experienced and eased the pain of the brutal conditions they were now living under. It recharged them spiritually and physically. In this illustration of the ring shout from 1862, you can see many of the elements that reemerge in the Big Apple 75 years later. They're moving in a counterclockwise circle. The man in the center is probably Muslim background praying to Allah. The people witnessing are on their knees, encouraging the moving dancers, just as they do years later in the Big Apple dance. Hypnotic music and repetitive circular movement transported the participants into an ecstatic state beyond all worldly cares. They believed they had a direct connection with spiritual or ancestral forces and harnessed these for a healing ceremony. The ring shout persisted long after slavery ended. In fact, it was still being practiced in coastal Georgia and South Carolina in the 1930s, as seen in The Emperor Jones with Paul Robeson, a 1932 film. Behind the opening credits, the African origin of the ring shout is suggested by showing African dancers in a circle and then fading right into a circle of the African American ring shout in a church. You'll hear a cry as one of the dancers falls into a state of possession and is escorted safely away. The ring shout continues to be done to this day in one location in coastal Georgia by the McIntosh County Shouters, although the practitioners are elderly and fearful the tradition will die out. Again, we see some features the ring shout has in common with the Big Apple, especially the whole idea of responding to the caller.
Sister Skipper pays close attention to the words of the song. Here, a conversation between God and Eve, and pantomimes the action, Adam picking up leaves to cover his nakedness. The words of the shout songs are not incidental, but contain important meanings ranging from biblical dramas to coded protests against slavery.
holding her skirt like the rusty dusty step in the Big Apple. As dancers move in a counterclockwise circle and shout Daniel shout, directions are given to a slave named Daniel so he can avoid getting caught by the master. When the caller says, "Go the other way," they follow closely. Here's a rock step. Here they're imitating a bird. Steps like these, which imitate birds and animals, pantomime everyday activities, or tell stories, are common in African dance. Through the ring shout, they found their way into the Big Apple. Although the ring shout was a religious practice, over time it found its way into secular dance, evolving into the walk around, a finale dance seen here in a Cotton Club show from 1932. This is about the Big Apple that was choreographed by his airmail version of the Big Apple for Whitey's Lindy Hoppers in 1937. He opened with a shout step. Although Manning had never seen the Big Apple dance, he apparently connected it to the ring shout, which he had observed during his childhood summers and holidays in Aiken, South Carolina. In his autobiography, Ambassador of Lindy Hop, Manning relates his memory of playing with other children in South Carolina, away from the grown-ups, and doing comical imitations of the minister and congregants they had seen in the church. Perhaps this seems disrespectful, but the youngsters may have been uncomfortable with the display of intense emotions they saw, and this may have relieved their anxiety. It's possible that the young dancers at the Big Apple Club in South Carolina, finding themselves in a church-like setting, also engaged in some playful pantomime of the ring shout they had observed in church. They mixed it with the day's swing music and their favorite jazz steps. Mirroring the originators of the Big Apple dance, Frankie Manning used jazz steps from his Harlem experience and memories from his Southern childhood. It's not surprising that he struck an authentic note with his Big Apple choreography. Fortunately, Frankie Manning's Big Apple is preserved in the film Keep Punching, danced by Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. In 1937, the Big Apple dance craze lifted the spirits of a depressed nation. Each of its steps had a history which may not have been known to the dancers. Still, when the steps came together into a joyous dance, it had the power to bring people together, to laugh and shout and feel confident that better times would come.
Well, I guess I don't need to see you. A little bit more light here. I don't know if you followed the narrative of that. The dance, as I told you, it became a fad all over the country, very strongly. So there, you know, I've looked in a lot of small town newspapers, and there were Big Apple events and things like that. It got started in a black nightclub in Columbia, South Carolina, during a time of very strong segregation. And white kids from the town got the opportunity to observe the dance in the nightclub because there was a balcony in the building. The reason there was a balcony in the building that they could stand on was that it had been an Orthodox Jewish synagogue, and the women used to have to be up in the balcony when the Jewish religious services were going on below. I had the good fortune to visit the Big Apple building, which is still, it's now a historic building that you can see in Columbia, South Carolina. I had the good fortune to visit it and meet some of the people who had originally been involved in the Big Apple there. And including, I met this one white lady who danced with Frankie, actually, but she said that when she was a young girl, and it was a Jewish synagogue, she had to stay up in the balcony. And then when it became the Big Apple nightclub and she and the other teenagers came to watch the dancers there, she had to stay up in the balcony. So, you know, finally, she was able to come down on the main floor. And I just wanted to make sure that you understood that aspect of it. That's how it got started. It was a black dance, got imitated by white people, got really very popular. You can call it co-opted, you know, if you want to use a concept like that. Got very popular around the white population, and probably for very similar reasons to its popularity and strength in the black population. And I tried to allude to that by talking about how old the dance was, that it was somehow, when the slaves came from all different parts of Africa and didn't necessarily know each other's languages or customs, they somehow hit on this circle dance, which was also a healing dance, as a common strain. And to me, I said, gee, it must have been a few hundred years old in Africa before they even got to this continent. Can you show the picture? So that was as far as I got in this particular documentary. Thank you. Hello? It sounds about the same to me. Is it picking up? But you can hear me, right?
Yes.
If you could tell me the picture. Anyhow, I was watching a story about cave art, a documentary on TV, and they showed this picture of cave art from, it's South Africa, not far from Cape Town. And it was the area where the Kalahari Bushmen are. And they have a very ancient culture. And there's tons and tons of cave paintings there, which is amazing. And this one has been identified as a painting of a dance or a ritual in which people are going in counterclockwise circles, just as we find in the ring shout and then in the Big Apple. And if you'll notice at the center, there's a couple of people there. And what that is, at least it's identified by the people who interpret the cave paintings, as a healing that's going on. So what we have is that the energy, the spiritual force that's kind of drummed up through the dancing is used to perform a healing. And in much more recent times among the Kalahari, they still have ritual practices which are used for healing, and not just for healing individuals, but when the community is starting to get cross and they're having a lot of arguments with each other and stuff like that, the leader says, I think it's time for us to hold a dance. And they have a very kind of long, scary ritual that goes on all night and stuff like that. But basically, we got one that works. Hello.
Hey.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, it's the same concept. And I guess what I like about this story is that I think that, you know, in modern times, we don't have these primitive rituals, but I think there's something about the appeal of dancing, moving to the music, and particularly the kind of dancing we do, which has roots not just in the Savoy Ballroom from the 20s and 30s, but really goes back through slavery times and back to Africa. And as we can see, thousands and thousands of years of tradition in Africa that's in the bones of this dance that we do. So that's basically my story for today. But I would love to take questions about the Big Apple and the history. And I know it's a little bit complex, so don't feel embarrassed. Yes, in the way back.
Do people tell us why they
Do people tell us why they choose counterclockwise to be the healing direction?
No, it's just throughout the literature. Both in terms of the Big Apple, I don't think they knew why they were doing it counterclockwise, but also in the historic dances like the ring shout, and there's an Arabic dance where they dance around a mosque or something that's counterclockwise. I've always wanted to kind of study the physiology of it or whatever. You know, I think there's an answer, but I have no idea what it is. Do you have an idea?
No, I don't. But last weekend I was at an experience where former Senator Nina Turner was speaking and going into call and response, doers of the deeds, and she took people off the stage and down around counterclockwise, and it turned out to be church, which wasn't what we had expected. I mean, if we hadn't known. That is directly from the ring shout. You know, that kind of circular things in the churches. And yeah, that's great. You know, it's funny because I knew Frankie Manning, as many of you know, was very close to him for many years, and I was doing all this research on the Big Apple and ring shout. You know, he had no idea what I was talking about. Ring shout. You know, it didn't resonate for him until I showed him that little movie clip from 1932, the one where they do the African, the overlay with the Southern Baptist Church. He said, "Oh, that." You know, I mean, he grew up in New York, but he spent his summers in South Carolina, not all that far from Columbia, South Carolina. And he was accustomed to seeing that particular thing going on in church. That was just a commonality to him. What you didn't hear here is how he came to choreograph the Big Apple, and it's kind of an interesting story. When it got to be a popular craze, the group of white Southern Big Applers came up to New York and performed at the Roxy for 3 weeks. And Whitey, who knew that this was going to be hot, went the first night, you know, took notes, and he sent a letter to Frankie, who was in Hollywood working on a Judy Garland movie called Everybody Sing, describing the dance that he had seen, and asked Frankie to choreograph one for Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, both for use at the Savoy and to use in the film that they were working on out there. Okay, so Frankie choreographed a Big Apple based on what was written in this letter. And what I feel is that he just intuitively, I said, Frankie, why did you start the dance with a shout as the first step? And he said to me, "Be darned if I know." You know? Either he didn't remember or he never was conscious of it. But I think even as he heard the description of the dance, of the Big Apple dance, he recognized the features of the ring shout in it. And I've seen Frankie teach the shout step and go into this whole religious thing like he was in church. Okay, just like you experienced out there. So, I mean, it definitely, and you know, the shout was not in the sense of shouting loud. It was really strong feelings, expressing strong, intense feelings. That's what the shout was about in the church. Sometimes they use the expression blues shouter. They don't mean it's a loud singer. They mean the message of power is really coming through. Questions? Yes?
You said that at the time the Big Apple was really popular, that people knew the moves and would try to do them at the Savoy or something like that. Where did they learn them?
It's kind of like Ring Around the Rosie and stuff like that. You know, there were pecking, there were steps and moves that were fads, that's even without TV, spread around the country. And you know, particularly kids, but of trucking. Now, most of the steps that I'm mentioning are steps that came from Harlem and just caught on. But there were other kinds of steps. The London Bridge, which Frankie uses in the finale of The Big Apple, and other things come from European culture. But they were just things people knew. And that's why I'm saying that the advantage of the regional thing is that a caller knew what steps people knew and what they didn't know.
And I don't know if you know, there were Big Apple competitions to see who did best. And I imagine that one of the things that happened in those competitions is that the caller would call some more challenging steps. And, you know, that's kind of how you'd see who won out on it. There's a Frankenstein step and so anything from the common culture that people shared could make its way into the Big Apple. Yeah.
So the Lindy Hop came before the Big Apple,
Yes.
right? The Lindy Hop came before the Big Apple.
Yes.
And so do you think that Frankie, I don't know if he was still visiting South Carolina during the 20s or, you know, just prior to the development of the Big Apple, but do you think that he helped inform the creation of the Big Apple dance even in South Carolina?
It's an interesting thought. The exchange between North and South is really important. And during that period of the Great Migration, it wasn't, certainly people from the South were moving up north, but people from the North were visiting all the time. And I'm sure a lot of kids besides Frankie were sent down there for the summer and helped with bringing water in the cotton plantation and stuff like that, and eating watermelon, according to Frankie. It's an interesting thought. I don't know what to tell you. I know that when people like Frankie came down, if they knew some neat steps or dances from the North, I'm sure they shared them. Frankie said that he was going down there in summers until he was about 10, which would take it until about 1924, and it's a little bit before he got to the Savoy Ballroom or the other ballrooms, but it's not before he had been at house rent parties. So, you know, he knew a step or two himself.
And then also just the counterclockwise circle.
Yeah.
I know at the Hajj,
Yes.
in Mecca, they do that there too.
Yeah, exactly. There's definitely in the ring shout, there are roots that are African, but also North African, Arabic kind of roots through Muslim tradition. So it seems to be universal, and as I say, there might be something about the physiology of it, of moving in a circle that way. I don't know. I've always wondered. Yeah, more questions? Thank you. Lexi?
I'll wait for the microphone.
Okay.
So the only dance craze that I've lived through is the Macarena.
Okay.
Would you draw any similarities or anything like how that sort of spread through the country or anything like that?
I have to say, I've thought about this when I speak to crowds like this. For me, because I'm a little older than you, it was the twist. Okay? The hula hoop, which was not a dance craze, but it was a craze. Okay? There's almost nobody who has contact with other human beings who didn't know about these phenomena. And I think that's what it was like with the Big Apple. I have to say with the Macarena it didn't get to that power for whatever reason. You know, it didn't have the stuff. Did you have another question?
Well, I was just thinking, like, with the Macarena, it was done at every gathering, right? So would the Big Apple be sort of like, you know, there's a family party, a family reunion, or a wedding, or something like that, and somebody would say, it's Big Apple time, and then...
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. It was done, you know, I've looked at a lot of old newspapers. So it was done at every kind of event where people got together, outdoors events, indoors events. But it was also done at the White House where Roosevelt, FDR, was the president at the time. When his daughter became engaged, it was done at her engagement party. And this is like the highest endorsement.
I just want to draw an analogy with It's Okay, I'm Loud.
Yeah, we can hear.
In Cuba, I think about 40 years ago or less, a group of people at a social club called Casino developed a thing called Rueda de Casino, a casino's wheel, where they do a called circle dance, and it can go either way. The leaders aren't moving much, but the followers can progress from leader to leader around one way or the other. but what's interesting about it is how social it is and how it's a combination of very African circle roots and the European. It's not the shout is not a partner dance, but then you've added this leader follower or man woman dynamic from Europe. So it's just interesting that there's a parallel development that also became a craze. The people in the casino were doing it, and then those kids kind of, hey, you know, we're all at a party. Will you guys do your circle dance and show us? And then it spread.
The rueda is a wheel, isn't it? That what it means?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's true also of the Big Apple that it really did combine African roots that came through the ring shout with couple dancing roots, which were much more typically European. There were shag steps and different, you know, any kind of steps that could be thrown in were thrown in there. Yes?
I've just been thinking about other folk dances that I've learned, and many of them are counterclockwise. So I'm thinking there's something about the physiology of starting, because more people are right-handed, right-footed. I don't know what it is, but a lot, Balkan dances, a lot of them, if they're going anywhere, go counterclockwise. The hora is counterclockwise.
And, you know, it's if any of you ever find the answer, I'd be really interested. There's this picture which I used a lot in the video. This happens to be an original magazine where it appeared. You recall it from, and this is the actual Big Apple as photographed from the balcony. And for all of my years of studying, one day I looked at the picture and realized that they weren't going counterclockwise, they were going clockwise. And I actually think it's possible that the photographer reversed it.
Yeah.
Because the guy who's pointing, maybe he was left-handed, I don't know. I don't know. But just to say, it's an interesting and challenging mystery. Aurelie, you have a question?
I'm interested in the hall where it started.
Yes.
So when the white people started gathering upstairs to watch, were they actually interacting with the people below, like talking to them? And did they eventually go downstairs?
Okay.
And then my other question is, we know of some of the people who were upstairs who went on to do things, and we've even met some of them these days, and we know their names. How about from the actual originators downstairs? Do we know about any of them?
Very little. I did meet one of the women who's had been one of the original Big Apple dancers, but she wasn't really a dancer, it was her boyfriend who was. She couldn't show us much. But no, these are good questions. The fact is there was strict segregation in the South, and from everything that I've heard, the communication up and down was sort of nonverbal, okay? The dancers on the dance floor, when the music stopped, they would stop dancing until the kids up in the balcony threw money down to put into the Nickelodeon, which was, you had to put a nickel in to get the next song out of it. Okay, so, I mean, this was the kind of communication going on. To my knowledge, nobody from upstairs ever came down. Okay, but these kids, they went home and practiced, tried to imitate what they saw, and I'm sure changed it in some ways. And then it went on that summer in Myrtle Beach, so it wasn't at the Big Apple building. But I would like to say a couple of things about the building. It's been restored, and it is now owned by a couple who are swing dancers and are really interested in preserving it in a way that, first of all, keeps swing in there and keeps the memory of the story there. So that's very exciting. It's Richard Durlack. I don't know if any of you have met him. And so that's great. And the other thing is that it was when I went down there with Frankie, he was dancing on the dance floor of that building, and it's been very nicely restored. It's a catering place, you know. People can throw weddings or other events there. But anyhow, I'm dancing in there, and I'm looking out these windows. They're church-like windows. And there's up on the top, there's this like glass thing, and you know, it just feels like a church in a funny way. And I said, wow, you know, that must have been how these kids got that inspiration to play around with church stuff. in that setting. So I think the building is very critical to this historical event.
Thank you.
Any more? Okay, no more questions. Maybe that's it. If you'd like to come down while we're still here and take a look at memorabilia, you're welcome to do that, and want to chat with me, it's fine. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for coming.